I just read another user's story about the smiling man at the laundromat, and it instantly transported me back to a similar high school memory. I was about 14 or 15, and my older brother that went to the same high school as me would drive us to school most days when our parents stopped wanting to. We both had homeroom that began at 7 in the morning. One day, on the way to school, we stopped at a donut shop that was in a sort of remote part of town on a stretch of highway. It was still kind of dark outside before 6:30 a.m. This was in the late 90s or early 2000s, before it was common teenagers had their own cell phones, so I didn't have a way to call or text. This shop had nothing around it except trees and a stretch of empty land. The parking lot was too big for how small this place was. He didn't park us in the very front spot by the door. To this day I have no idea why he didn't. He parked about a row and a half from the front and walked in. No one was at the counter, so I watched him wait for service. While he was waiting, my eyes wandered and panned suddenly to a man's face, staring daggers at me from one of the tables in the shop. It was very startling, like in movies when they look through binoculars and see someone staring at them through the scope. I immediately looked away and down because it freaked me out. At first, I thought maybe the man was tired and was just kind of spacing out because of how early it was, but I still felt his eyes on me after a few minutes, and although I fought myself to look up, I glanced up and he had a creepy smile on his face. He had short, bobbed hair like a dude would have had in the 70s. I looked at my brother, and it felt like an eternity as he picked the donuts. He had turned around once, and I tried to get his attention, but he turned back around to keep choosing. When my brother was talking to the cashier, I noticed the man at the table get up. He never took his eyes off me, and I remember my heart beating hard in my chest as I looked down, since I couldn't think of anything else to do. This is how I was reminded of this memory, the feeling of helplessness when someone is staring and making you uncomfortable. I hoped he would just walk away, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed he was approaching the truck. My first thought was to reach over and honk the horn as loud as I could, but he was already about one stride away from the driver's side, and I had then noticed the door hadn't auto-locked. It was the kind that had the little pop-up button lock. I only had seconds to choose to lock the door or honk the horn, so I practically leapt over, and I remember slapping down the lock button. Not but 2 or 3 seconds later, the man pulled on the door handle. He turned to walk away, but then turned again and tried to pull harder. I then honked the horn to get attention, but I saw my brother had walked to the other side of the counter out of view. After I honked a second time, the guy walked off past the car, across the street where it was a bit wooded before the highway resumed. When my brother came back, he asked why I was honking and being impatient because it was still early and we wouldn't be late. After I told him some creep tried to get in, he drove around the area, but no one was around since it had been like 5 more minutes before he got to the car. Creepy, smiley, zoned-out donut shop guy. Let's not meet. I've always loved hiking. The fresh air, the solitude, the sense of being one with nature. It's my favourite way to unwind. There's a trail I frequent, one that winds through dense woods and up to a picturesque overlook. It's never crowded, which is exactly how I like it. Until last month, that is. I set out on a Saturday morning, the sun just beginning to burn off the early fog. My car was the only one in the small gravel parking lot as usual. I shouldered my backpack, adjusted my hiking boots, and began the familiar trek. About an hour in, I noticed something strange. There was a second set of footprints on the trail, faint but fresh. I hadn't seen or heard anyone, but I brushed it off. Maybe someone had started before me and turned back. I continued, the forest growing thicker. The canopy overhead blocked out much of the sunlight, casting long shadows across the path. As I rounded a bend, I froze. A man stood ahead, partially hidden behind a tree. He was watching me. We locked eyes, and an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. He wasn't dressed for hiking. No backpack, no proper shoes, just jeans and a faded hoodie. I gave a tight nod and forced myself to walk past him, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. "Beautiful day for a hike," he said as I passed. His voice was low, almost a growl. "Yeah," I replied, not breaking my stride. Once I was around the next bend, I picked up my pace. My mind raced. Who was he? Why was he out here alone, unprepared for a hike? The feeling of being watched persisted, and I couldn't shake the image of his piercing eyes. I reached the overlook, but I couldn't enjoy the view. My thoughts were consumed with getting back to my car. I started my descent, practically jogging down the trail. About halfway back I heard it. Footsteps, not the steady crunch of someone on a leisurely walk, but quick, deliberate steps. I glanced over my shoulder. He was there, closer now, his face a mask of unsettling calm. I broke into a full run, heart pounding in my chest. The forest blurred around me as I flew down the trail, not daring to look back. My ears were filled with the sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my feet. Finally, the parking lot came into view. My car was the only one there. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking, and threw myself inside, locking the doors. As I started the engine, I saw him emerge from the trailhead, just standing there, watching me. I didn't waste a second. I sped out of the lot, not slowing down until I was miles away. Only then did I let myself breathe. I haven't been back to that trail since. The memory of those eyes, the way he watched me, still haunts my dreams. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked back, if I hadn't run. This happened a few years ago, and I was walking my dog like I always did. I stayed in a small town where nothing ever happened, and most people would be in past 7 p.m. I used to walk my dog every evening around 6 p.m, so not many people were out, and I walked that way every day. I usually went with my mum, but that night I went by myself because my mum was busy. I was walking by the main road, and the other side of the path was a shop. My dog decided to relieve itself on the ground right outside it. Embarrassed, I picked it up, then saw a silver car pull up and stop outside the shop. At first, I thought it was someone stopping to go inside, so I paid it no mind. I stood up straight and was about to continue walking when the man in the car rolled down his window and said hi to me. I could hear that he wasn't English and thought he must be on holiday and needed directions. In the passenger seat was another man holding a notepad and pen, and in the back was a dog cage. I said hi back, and he asked where a certain hotel was. I told him where, and he thanked me, but when I was about to walk off, he said, "How much for the dog?" I stopped and looked at him confused, and he said again, "How much for the dog?" I told him she wasn't for sale, and noticed the man in the passenger seat was writing something in his notebook. The man laughed and said he loves dogs, then asked how much for you then. Him asking how much my dog was creeped me out. But this comment was way too creepy. I said that I'm not for sale, and laughed awkwardly, and again the man in the passenger seat wrote something down in his notebook. He laughed back, and I said I had to go and started to walk fast back home. When I turned around the corner, I looked behind me and saw the car was following me. I didn't want to go home because then they would know where my house was, so I went down an alleyway where a car couldn't follow, and I lost them. About a year after that, I was on a Zoom call with a boy from another town not far from mine, a few other people and a teacher. We were telling each other weird things that have happened to us, and you won't believe it. The boy said he was walking his dog and a silver car pulled up next to him and was asking weird questions about his dog, then asked if he had any sisters for sale. I told him what happened to me, and it was the same man. The boy also said there was another man with a notepad in the passenger seat and a cage in the back during his encounter. What made me want to tell this story is because a few months ago this year my mum's friend said her friend was walking her dog, and a man in a silver car asked to buy her dog and her, then followed her, only she went into her brother's house, and when he came outside, the car drove off. To that man who asked to buy my dog, me and others, let's not meet again.